In this video, we're going to take a look at speed boosters and if this little adapter can make your crop sensor camera look like a full frame camera. Hi, my name is Roger and on this channel we talk about cameras, tech gear and videography. And if this is something that you're interested in, click that subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss any new upload. In this video, we're going to talk about full frame lenses and cropped sensor lenses. How you can use these different lenses on different kind of camera bodies and if you can get the full frame look out of your cropped sensor camera. In my videos, I try and explain things in a way that will make everyone understand things, even if they don't have that much knowledge from before. If you're not up to date about the differences between full frame camera and crop sensor camera, go watch part 1, 2 and 3 of this series that I've made so you understand what we're talking about. There are different kind of lenses. Some are made for full frame sensor cameras and some are made for crop sensor cameras. These lenses are made to project the image on the sensor so it fits that specific size sensor. Full frame sensors are bigger than cropped sensors, so full frame lenses projects a bigger image than what a cropped sensor lens does. You cannot use a cropped lens on a full frame camera, or you can, but you will get a heavy vignette because it doesn't project a big enough image to fit a full frame sensor. So the edges will have black sides or a vignette. But you can use a full frame lens on a cropped sensor camera because the image they project on the cropped sensor is bigger than the sensor. So you cover the whole sensor, but you get a cropped image because the sensor only covers a portion of what it's projected onto it. But can you use any full frame lens on a cropped sensor camera? Unfortunately, no. Now, since I use Canon cameras, I'm going to talk about Canon cameras, because me talking about another camera brand than what I use, that would just be strange. But no, not every full frame lens can be used on a cropped sensor camera. If we go a few years back in history, we did not have the same cameras we have today. We didn't have the mirrorless cameras, we only had DSLRs. We still have DSLRs, but the camera world is moving forward towards the mirrorless system. Anyway, really simple explained, DSLRs, they have a mirror inside of the camera that projects the image to the viewfinder. The mirror inside of the DSLRs take up a certain amount of space. And that makes the distance from the lens mount to the sensor bigger than in a mirrorless camera. Because as in the name mirrorless, these cameras does not have a mirror inside. This makes the distance between the lens mount and the sensor smaller. So lenses made for DSLRs are made with that distance in mind, and lenses that are made for mirrorless cameras has to be made in a different way because there is lesser distance between the mount and the sensor. So you cannot put a mirrorless lens on a DSLR because there is just too much distance between the lens mount and the sensor. If we take Canon cameras, they have somewhat confusing camera lineup. They have full frame and cropped sensor DSLRs, and they have full frame and cropped sensor mirrorless cameras. Full frame and cropped sensor DSLRs, they have an EF or EFS lens mount. EF is the full frame lenses and EFS is the cropped sensor lenses. Cropped sensor mirrorless cameras, they have an EFM lens mount. And full frame sensor mirrorless cameras, they have an RF lens mount. EFM is the cropped sensor lenses to the mirrorless cameras, and RF is the full frame lenses to the mirrorless cameras. And by the way, if you like this video by now, click that like button and a sub would be highly appreciated. So first, let's take this EF 50mm 1.8 lens. This is a lens made for a DSLR. The only thing I have to do to get this lens onto my mirrorless camera is that I just have to increase the distance from the lens mount to the sensor. And for this, I use an RF to EF adapter. In addition to just increasing the distance, this adapter also have electronics inside needed to still have autofocus, electronic aperture settings, and image stabilization intact if the lens that you are using has image stabilization. So that's a full frame lens on a full frame camera. Second, let's take my M6 Mark II. This is a cropped sensor mirrorless camera. This camera has an M mount for EFM lenses. I cannot use EFM lenses on a full frame DSLR or a full frame mirrorless camera because the lenses are made for a cropped sensor camera. But I can use a full frame lens on the cropped sensor mirrorless camera. Unfortunately, I cannot use RF lenses because Canon or third-party manufacturers has not made that possible with any adapter yet. But you can use a full-frame DSLR lens on the M6 Mark II. You just have to use an adapter. This is an EF to an EFM adapter. This increases the distance from the lens mount to the sensor, and it also has electronics inside to keep the autofocus, the electronic aperture settings, and image stabilization. With this EF to EFM adapter, you can use EF lenses, but you can also use cropped sensor EFS lenses because it is, after all, a cropped sensor camera. But with this adapter and the full frame EF lens, you still only use a portion of the image that the lens projects onto the cropped sensor. There are other adapters on the market that does one more thing than just increase the physical distance to the sensor, and that is an adapter like this Viltrox speedbooster. In addition to being a regular adapter, this also have a lens or glass inside. So when you put the Viltrox speedbooster onto the M6 Mark II, you get another lens or glass in front of the sensor. Now, what this lens inside of the speedbooster does is that it concentrates all that surrounding light or image that the full frame lens projects down to fit the cropped sensor. As we know, to get the full frame equivalent, we multiply the focal length by the crop factor. So if we take this EF 50mm lens, we take 50mm times 1.6 and that equals 80. So this 50mm lens is an 80mm equivalent on a full frame camera. But that is if we use this regular adapter. If we use this speed booster instead, it's 50mm times 0.71, which is the crop factor of the speed booster, and then you multiply that with the crop factor of 1.6. So with this 50mm lens, that equals a 56.6mm full frame equivalent. So you have almost made it into a full frame, but there is still some crop to it. And not only has the speed booster concentrated the image down to fit the cropped sensor, it has also concentrated the extra light around the sensor onto the sensor. And with all that extra light concentrated into the sensor, you now can boost up your shutter speed on your camera. Therefore, the name Speed Booster. Now, you may think, wow, that's great. Now I don't have to buy a full frame camera at all. I can just buy a speed booster and use full frame lenses on my cropped sensor camera. And yes, of course, you can do that. But there are some negativities to a speed booster. You are adding extra additional elements in front of the sensor. So some loss in quality has to be expected. I went out the other day and I took some photos with this EF 50mm lens on both my Canon EOS R and my M6 Mark II. And on the M6 Mark II, I used this speed booster. I tried to get the same framing and I tried to use the same settings on both cameras, so now you can take a look and see if you see any differences. Now, the speed booster, it adapts full frame lenses to cropped sensor cameras, but you cannot use EFS lenses on this speed booster. And the reason for that is, one, there isn't enough space inside with the glass in the speed booster to fit an EFS lens, and two, there is no need to use an EFS lens on a speed booster because EFS lenses, they are made for cropped sensor cameras. So there is no extra additional image around the sensor, the cropped sensor, that you can concentrate down to fit onto the sensor. Therefore, if you use a cropped sensor lens on a speed booster, you will only get black edges around your image. So to answer the question, can you make a cropped sensor camera into a full frame camera? No. A full frame camera is still a full frame camera and a cropped sensor camera is still a cropped sensor camera. But with the speed booster, you can almost get the same focal length using a full frame lens on a cropped sensor camera. Now, throughout the video, I've said that you cannot use a cropped sensor lens on a full frame camera, but actually you can. You can use cropped EFS mount lenses on a full frame mirrorless camera. If we take the EFS 10 to 18mm lens, which is a cropped sensor lens, I can use that on my full frame EOS R without getting that vignetting. That's because the EOS R, when using a cropped sensor lens, crops in to its full frame sensor so that the image fits inside the image that the lens projects. So by using a cropped sensor lens on the EOS R, I basically change the EOS R into a cropped sensor camera. Now, there are both positive and negative sides to this. One positive is that you now have more zoom or crop because you have to apply the crop factor like we talked about in part 1 of this series. But the negative is that for photography, you don't get to use all the pixels that's on the full frame sensor. You only use a portion of the sensor because you have cropped in on that sensor. And I also have to mention that I said EF lenses are full frame lenses and EFS lenses, they are cropped sensor lenses. But that's not always the case either. If we take the Sigma 18 to 35mm lens, which is a cropped sensor lens, that lens has an EF mount. So I basically can use that lens on the speed booster and on my M6 Mark II, but I will get a heavy vignetting because the corners of the widest part of the sensor, it doesn't have any image to project. So that's the video for this week. I do hope you got something out of it. If you did, click the like button. And if you want to see more videos from me, click that subscribe button too and the notification bell. So, thank you for watching. Maybe I will see you in another video.